anymore because they're going to throw me off of YouTube. I consider it a badge of honor to get thrown off YouTube. I mean, somebody watched it. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. So we are up to we're middle of the Gemara about talking about Karkan and Zealous. The way we got into this was the Gemara was talking about advice that Reb Huna gave the Hadassim brokers, and that was on Lamed Amud Aleph. He told the Hadassim brokers, when you purchase from the farmers, the Hadassim, have them cut it. Because if you cut it, it's possible that they're using land that they stole from Yidden, and Karka Einin Zealous, and therefore when you cut it down, you're the Gazlan, and therefore you will not be able to use it for your own personal Hadassim if you're planning to use your own stock. Therefore, he said, it's better to have them cut it. So then after they cut it, there was Yush, and when they sell it to you, there's Shina Rishos, and then you can use it because of Karka and Zealous. That's what the Gemara said. And then the Gemara got into the question of Karka and Zealous. And that's what started off our Omid Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, which we learned on Friday, where the Brisa is quoting a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer, who says a stolen sukkah is pasul, and the Chachamim who say a stolen sukkah is kosher. And the question was exactly what are the characteristics, what happened to make this sukkah gzula. So Rashi tells us a sukkah gzula means there's a sukkah that was built, for instance, let's say Reuven built a sukkah on the Reuven's property. So the walls, the wood belongs to him, as well as the property that it's on. And Shimon came in and hijacked his property, picked him up by the collar. Shimon picked up Reuven by the collar and tossed him out of his house, tossed him out of his sukkah. And he's parking there. So he's sitting in a sukkah structure that was built, and it's on the land of Reuven, and he came and hijacked it. That's what a sukkah gzula is. And Mesachach Rishus Harabim is someone who builds a sukkah in Rishus Harabim. So although the wood is his, but he's parked on a land that doesn't belong to him, it's public land. So that's also considered stolen land. So Rav Nachman explained the machlokes as follows. Rabbi Eliezer happens to hold karka. Rabbi Eliezer happens to hold that karka is einin zealous. That's what he happens to hold. I apologize. I believe Rabbi Eliezer holds that karka is zealous. Let me just double check to make sure. Yeah, he holds karka is zealous. I'm sorry. Rabbi Eliezer holds karka is zealous. So if karka is zealous, then what it means is when you took this karka, when you hijacked someone else's sukkah, you're in a stolen sukkah. And Rabbi Eliezer learns on Daf Chav Zayin and Beis. Rabbi Eliezer told us that it says Chag HaSukkah is Tasa L'cha, which is the maftir of today's parasha in Re'eh. We linked Chag HaSukkah is Tasa L'cha, and we learn from there L'cha v'loi gezula, L'cha v'loi she'ula. So Rabbi Eliezer holds the sukkah could be stolen, and since the sukkah could be stolen, it's considered a stolen sukkah, and therefore you're not yotze. Even if you hold sukkah is einin zealous, which means the sukkah always is in the rishus of the original owner, well, then you're sitting in a sukkah she'ula. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, L'cha tells you that a sukkah she'ula is not either a good sukkah. While the Rabbanan hold that karka is einin zealous, and it is a sukkah she'ula. So even though you threw Reuven out and you parked in that sukkah, you don't have any ownership. You don't even have a kidding zela. You have nothing. It's no different than if you borrowed it from him, which means it completely belongs to the original owner, and you're sitting in a borrowed sukkah. But the Rabbanan hold one could be yotze in a borrowed sukkah. The inyan of lachem applies to the dalad minim on the first day of sukkahs, but there's no requirement of lachem on the sukkah. You're allowed to sit in someone else's sukkah, which is how we hold, and that's why the Rabbanan held that this sukkah is kosher. And that's where we were up to on Friday. Aval, however, so the gezela of the karka, where there's a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, if it's kosher, is only when the karka of the sukkah was stolen, meaning you're parked in a sukkah that's on somebody else's property. Well, what if you built the sukkah on your own property? You merely stole the supplies with which to build a sukkah. Aval gozel eitzim b'sikeich behen. What if you stole wood and you used that wood as chach, but the property that you built the sukkah on is your own property? Then divrei hakoil ein loy elo demei eitzim. Everybody agrees that you're kind of that wood, and therefore you have a good sukkah, it's your sukkah, and all you have to do is pay back to the owner, to the nigzal, to the victim, the value of the wood. How do I know that? How do I know that our Mishnah or our Brisa would agree, everybody would agree that they're Yotze? Is midakatani dumi de Rishus HaRabbim. The two cases where our Brisa quotes Rabbi Eliezer arguing with the Chachamim are Sukkah Gzula and Mesachik Rishus HaRabbim. So the Gemara says they must be parallel, they must have some commonalities. Ma Rishus HaRabbim karka lavti dehu. The same way that in Rishus HaRabbim, what was not his, the karka, the land upon which the sukkah is built. Sukkah nami, so too the sukkah that's referred to in the Brisa, the sukkah nexelis, is also lav karka dehu. It must have been in somebody else's property. But if you built a sukkah in your own property, even though the materials that you used were stolen, that's going to be a kosher sukkah. Now this requires a lot of explanation, because it's still stolen wood. So if it's still stolen wood, how is it that it's a kosher sukkah? You built it with stolen wood. So let's slide into Rashi that will explain to us why it's not a problem. So I'm about 1.5 inches down in Rashi, where Rashi says, "Aval gozal eitzim v'sikech bahem." Zok Rashi ein zu loy gezula v'loy shula. This would not fall under the category of sukkah gezula, nor will it fall under the category of sukkah sheula, which means, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, it will be a kosher sukkah. Why is that? The kanonu b'shinu ma'isa b'shinu Hashem. Because when you trimmed the schach, you probably didn't use the wood as is. You probably had to trim it so that it would fit. Or even if you didn't trim it, it's a shinu Hashem. It used to be lumber, and now it's schach. So since you were kanyat b'shinui, and it's on your own property, it's 100% a kosher sukkah. And there's another reason why it would be a kosher sukkah, even if there was no shinu whatsoever, where then technically this still belongs to the original owner, and then it is a sukkah shula or a sukkah gzula. Nevertheless, it's not. So Rashi mishum takana sashafim. They made a takana that when it's very hard to return the actual item that you sold, like for instance, what happens if you stole a beam and you use it to build your new house? Now that beam was never changed. There's no shinu. It's a beam. It was always a beam. Now it just built into my house. If I'm forced to give back that beam, the beam might be worth $500. But if I'm forced to give that same beam to the bailim, I'm going to have to knock my house down and probably incur an expense of tens of thousands of dollars to give him back his beam. I'd much rather just pay him the $500 for his beam. But if we would enforce the actual din Torah upon him to give back that beam, a gazlan will never do tshuva, because it simply will be very expensive for him to do tshuva. So therefore, they made it the kanas hashavim, and we told him, you know what? You don't have to break your house down. They just told him, pay back the value of the beam. Don't give back the actual beam. This way it'll be easier to do tshuva. And if you remember, when we learned the parasha of Yoina, which is coming up, they're going to learn it on Yom Kippur. If you remember, they said that when Yoina gave Musar to all the robbers in Nineveh, they actually wanted to do tshuva to such an extent, they actually broke their houses down to return beams that they stole, which means those people who were doing tshuva didn't rely on this takana sashava, and they actually gave the beams back. But we have a takana that the Rabbanan, through Hefker, Bez, and Hefker, allows the Gazlan to keep the actual beam and pay back with money. And therefore, this Ganev, who stole wood for the sukkah that he used as chach, is becoming the mitzvah of sukkah because it's now his. Fragt Rashi, based on what we said now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you have a sukkah gzula when you stole the property, like we had earlier. But according to the Rabbanan, even when you hijack someone's property, it's considered she'ula because kaka and exelis, so there's no problem of sukkah gzula there. We said over here, if you only steal the materials to put the schach, there's also no problem of sukkah gzula. The problem is, in Perek HaYoshan, we learned the moedu rabbanan b'gzula. The Gemara there tells us that the Rabbanan are moedu Rabbi Eliezer, that by a sukkah gzula you're not yotze. The question is, what possible case can there be of a sukkah gzula that you're not yotze? If you stole the property, we already said it's not a problem because it's a sukkah she'ula and a sukkah she'ula is kosher. And if you stole the wood to make the schach, we just said now that you're kainet, and therefore you don't have to remove it, and therefore it's considered your schach. So where, in what case, can there possibly be the problem of sukkah gzula? Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you where. It's by Elabavitch sukkah. Lav begozel sukkah muchaberes lakarka. A sukkah that's on the ground will never have a problem of sukkah gzula according to Rabbanan. And not in this last case where you just stole the wood. Ella begozel sukkah hasuya b'rosh hagala. If you stole a sukkah mobile, the whole sukkah is metaltlin. It's mobile. That's where you can have a problem of stolen sukkah, because there you stole a sukkah, it's not yours. Or b'rosh hashvina, if someone built a sukkah on a boat, he atzman exelis, there the actual sukkah can be stolen. She'ena mechuberes lakarka, it's not connected to the ground, so there's not a question of ground involved. And you might say maybe there's a takanos hashavim that you get to keep it and you could just pay its value. That's not true. So Rashi, you don't pay back the value and keep the sukkah. Rather, you have to give back the actual sukkah that you stole. You have to give it back the way it is. There is no concept of takanos hashavim where you actually stole the finished product. The whole reason why there's takanos hashavim is if you put the beam into your wall, now to give back a $500 beam, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars. But here you stole the whole sukkah. So you didn't build this sukkah. You didn't take wood and build it into a sukkah. You stole the finished product. So by you giving it back, you're not incurring any additional expense. You're just giving back what you took. He said that's the only case where you have a sukkah gezula, according to the Rabbanon, is if it was a mobile sukkah. And that's what Rashi says. Tosfos has a very big problem with Rashi, and he quotes Rashi and he offers a much different case, a stationary case where you can have a sukkah gezula. So let's look at Tosfos. It's the third line from the top of the Amud and Amud Aleph, and it says as follows: Ein zeh loy gezula v'loy she'ula. In a case where you stole material and you used it as schach, that's not a sukkah gezula or she'ula. The kananu b'shinu ma'isa, you were koinit b'shinu ma'isa b'shinu Hashem. And again, this is verbatim quoted from Rashi, so we'll chazer it. V'oid mishum tekanos hashavim ein loy alav lister es binyanoi ela yachzer damim. Frek Rashi v'od amrin v'perka yoshin demoidu rabbanon degzula lav begozel sukkah muchaberes lakarka v'loy begozel oidim v'sichach behem ela begozel sukkah hasuya b'rosh hagala or b'rosh hasvina. And the Bach says dehi atzma nigzelas. There, the sukkah itself is mobile and you can steal it. She'ena mechuberes lakarka, and therefore ve'ena lav lahachzedamim. There, he doesn't have it to takanos hashavim where he can keep the sukkah and just pay back cash. Ela kamoishi benuya, he has to give it back as is. The ein ba mishum takanos hashavim. The takanos hashavim doesn't apply to a case where you stole a completed sukkah. You didn't build it, and you didn't spend any money on it that you're going to lose if you give it back. That is how Rashi wrote. Rashi, for no reason, made this doichik case of sukkah gzula that is talking about a Lubavitcher sukkah mobile. Because the medichsiv lecha, where do we know that a sukkah gzula and a sukkah she'ula is not good? From this week's parsha, but a maftir it says chag sukkahs tasa lecha. The mimatina gzula beperek hayoshim. The gozal eitzim v'sikav behen. If you stole wood and you use it as chach, we said that hashinu achayzel lebriyasayu. That hashinu achayzel lebriyasayu. Umidaraisa loikana. You're not kind of midaraisa. Umishum takanas reish hani midarabana. The lecha is referring to a stolen sukkah. Yes, there might be a takanas meirish, but midaraisa, it's not a good sukkah. V'kram is sukkah midaraisa, and when the pasuk says lecha, not a gzula, the pasuk is referring to that sukkah before they made the takanas hashavim. You're right. After the takanas hashavim, through havker bes and havker, maybe it wouldn't be a good sukkah. But when it's not a shver on the Torah, what's lecha coming to be a ma'it? Lecha is coming to be a ma'it, a stolen sukkah before the takanas hashavim. Zok toisves v'afilu midirabbanan. And even if you want to say that there is a takanas hashavim, and therefore that wouldn't be a good example of a sukkah gzula. You could still find a case with a stationary sukkah. You don't have to go to a sukkah. You could say when the pasuk is coming to exclude a sukkah gzula, it's referring not to a case of a sukkah on a wagon. Rather, a simple example. Imagine your neighbor is going to Israel for sukkahs, and you figured you'll make your sukkah in his backyard. Gives you more room. So you go and you build a sukkah in his backyard. Uva Shimon, and what happened is Shimon wanted to go to Israel for sukkahs, but they closed the border. They didn't allow visitors because of COVID. So Erev sukkahs, he comes back from the airport, and there he is. And he sees that you've set up shop in his backyard. You built yourself a sukkah there. And he promptly picked you up by the collar, and he threw you out of his property. Now the question is, there's a sukkah built on Shimon's property, but Shimon didn't build it. Reuben built it. And Shimon's sitting in that sukkah. So there Shimon is stealing the sukkah of Reuben, because the wood and the schach all belong to Reuben. And Shimon is sitting in the sukkah gzula. There ain't a Torah she'ula. That wouldn't be called the Torah she'ula, because it's not karka, it's metalfin, it's the wood of the sukkah. Kivin l'kayim b'shusha shel Reuben. This sukkah is not on Reuben's property, it's in Shimon's property. It's not domi the karka. So a simple case of a stolen sukkah is not when it's on a wagon. It's when someone comes into my property without permission and builds a sukkah there, and I throw him out on his head, and now I want to use the sukkah that he built. Beautiful. Now we have a beautiful, interesting story. Hahi Savta, there was this elderly woman. The Asoy Lekamedi Rab Nachman. She came in front of Rab Nachman, and if you remember, a couple of blot ago, we had a shaila about No'i Sukkah that hung down more than 3 tefachim lower than the schach. And there was a question, are you allowed to sit under that in the sukkah, or is it a hefsek? And if you remember, Rabbi Chisda said you weren't allowed to sit under them. And Rabbi Chisda once came to the Reish Galusa to visit him on sukkahs, and Rabbi Nachman was in charge of the house. He was the poisek of the house of the Reish Galusa, and he purposely put Rabbi Chisda into a sukkah that had this No'i Sukkah hanging down, and he asked Rabbi Chisda, how come you slept in that sukkah? You hold its puzzle. And Rabbi Chisda answered, I'm potter from a sukkah because I'm an oisik b'mitzvah. I'm coming to visit my Rebbe. So you see, Rabbi Nachman was in charge of the house of the Reish Galusa. And she came screaming, this lady came screaming to Rabbi Nachman, and Amr Lei, she told him, the Reish Galusa is a bully and a thug. The Chulu Rabbanin and all of his henchmen and his cronies are a bunch of thugs. Chulu Rabban the Reish Galusa, b'sukkah gzula have Yosy. They're sitting in a stolen sukkah because the wood that they use for the schach, they stole out of my property. So they built the sukkah with stolen materials. It goes to show that not all the Reish Galusas were on the up and up. This is clear thuggery. And she was complaining that they're sitting in a stolen sukkah. Savcha v'loyashka par Rab Nachman. Rab Nachman totally ignored her, which right away begs the question, why would Rab Nachman ignore an elderly woman who comes with a just argument? They stole her wood. And we'll get to that in a little while. Amr Lei, she told him, after she saw that he ignored her pleas, she told him, Nachman, how dare you? Itza dahavale lavua, klas meya utam nisrei avdi, a woman whose father had 318 servants. Tzafka kamaychu is screaming in front of you, and you don't have the respect for her to at least respond. And Rashi says, who is her father that she's talking about? She's talking about Avram Avinu, who was brought down that he had 318 men that were serving him. So I'm a daughter of Avram Avinu. I'm aristocracy. I'm royalty. How dare you ignore me? There's a famous story with the Satmar Rebbe that he met somebody, and this guy was a little cocky about himself. So the Satmar Rebbe asked him, Wer dan Zaide, who do you stem from? What's your yichus? So he tells the Satmar Rebbe in a cocky way, Ich bin an Einikel from Avram Avinu. I'm a grandchild of Avram Avinu. So without skipping a beat, the Satmar Rebbe asked, really? From which wife? So Amr Lu Rab Nachman. Rab Nachman told her, Isahi, this woman is just a screamer. Ignore her. She's just a screamer. And she has no right to anything at all. And she has no right to claim back her wood. and the Reish Galusa was kind of the wood, and therefore the sukkah is good. The Ein La Ela Demei Eitzim Bilvad. All she's entitled to is the value of the wood, and we must be medayik. Why did it say Ve'ein La Ela Demei Eitzim Bilvad? Why didn't Reb Nachman say Ve'ein La Ela Demei Eitzim? Why does he stick it in the word Bilvad? That's question number one. Question number two is why didn't Reb Nachman listen to her? Why did he ignore her? So let's just keep these two questions in mind, and we'll go back to it. Amar Ravina. Ravina said, "Hai keshura de metalalasa de gezula." What if you steal a beam and you use it as the schach of your sukkah? It's stolen. Can the nigzal come and take it back on Yom Tov? So the halach is of delay rabbanan takanta mishum takanas meirish. The rabbanan made a takana based on the takanas meirish, where if you build a beam into your house, we don't force you to take it out and incur thousands of dollars of damage. We just allow you to pay for the beam. So too, if you build a beam into your sukkah, you made it into your schach, we're not going to force you to rip it out. Fact the more pshita. Why do I need Ravina to tell me this halacha? We already learned earlier, ma'ishname eitzim. We already learned that stolen eitzim are going to be kosher for your sukkah. Right? We just had before, gazal eitzim, v'zikach ben, divrakol ein la'el dem eitzim. So what is Ravina teaching us with this beam? Why is it different than any other wood that you stole to build a sukkah with? So you might say, when you make this takanas hashovim to help the goslin be able to pay back without incurring a big expense, you have to balance it. You have to look at the loss and the inconvenience to the nigzal as well. You can't just trample on his rights. So therefore, let's think about it. You might think wood, I understand you make takanas hashovim on. You know why? Because if you pay the nigzal, the value of the wood, with that money, he can go to any Home Depot without too much difficulty and replenish his wood. So where it's not causing the nigzal undue disturbance, undue inconvenience, there, for the sake of the shovim, we'll let the goslin get away with giving it back. So there, it's not such a big inconvenience to the nigzal. We'll force the nigzal to accept cash instead of the wood. Aval high, but a beam is much rarer to find. Lo shchicha. And it's much more difficult you can't just give me the money and then I can get a beam. I'm going to have to shop in this Home Depot. They might not have in stock. I'll have to go to Lowe's. They might not have in stock. I might have to schlep all the way to that lumber yard on Steels. I forgot what it's called. There's a lumber yard all the way on Steels. I might have to schlep all the way up there to buy it. That's a very difficult thing. You could make a takanas hashavim to help the goslin when you're causing undue inconvenience to the nigzal. So there you might think you don't take the takanas hashavim by a beam. Emaloi kamashvan ravina, that even by a beam where there's a greater inconvenience to the nigzal, there's still a takanas hashavim, and all the goslin has to pay back is the value of the beam. Zokt Gemara, but this rule that we don't make the guy take apart a sukkah and give you the beam back, Hanamili begav shiva. That just is for the 7 days of sukkah. Aval avosar shiva, after the 7 days of sukkah, hadar be'eni, give it back. Now I just want to pose a question. What does this mean, Hanamili begav shiva? If I come on middle of sukkah and I tell the goslin, give me my beam back, he'll say, no, I get to keep it for sukkah. Now, if I come back after sukkah, do I get it then? Or once we already let him keep it, I don't get it back even after sukkah. So is that what this means? Or do you say it means that or do you say that if I money you on sukkah, I don't get it, but as soon as sukkah is over, you still got to give it back to me? So again, the shaila is, if I come on sukkah to mon it and I don't get it back, do you say that I can come after sukkah and get it back then? Or once I montam on sukkah and the takanas hashavim was triggered, I can't get it back even if I come again after sukkah. I only get it back if I first came after sukkah where he wasn't needed anymore. So that child is going to come into play shortly. However, what if when this guy built the sukkah, he wanted to leave the framework up permanently and he built it into his house? Then I don't get the beam back ever. I only get money for the beam. So with all this information, based on the Ritva, the Achrayim want to explain why was it that Reb Nachman just ignored this woman. And he said, beautiful. Reb Nachman knew that shot in this Gemara that we just cleared, that if you come on Sukkot to ask for the bean back, we don't give it back to you because it's Sukkot. But once we don't give it back to the Nigzal and we let the Gazlan keep it, he can keep it permanently because it was given to him on Sukkot, but now he gets to keep it permanently. So even if you come back again after Sukkot to make another claim, it's too bad. The Gazlan already was kind of. The only way you can pull it back from the Gazlan is if you didn't claim it on Sukkot, you waited until after Sukkot to claim it, then they'll force him to give it back because he doesn't need it for the Sukkah anymore. Reb Nachman knew that. So Reb Nachman did not want to litigate her case. He wanted to ignore her because he wanted her to come back after Sukkot, where then he can get her back her beam. And that's why he ignored her. The reason why Reb Nachman was like Ashkechabei was because he was trying to help her. And he was trying to push her off not to litigate the case, because he knew the moment he litigates the case, she's going to lose her beam. What happened? She started screaming and not letting go. What did that cause? That caused that he had to tell her about the Takanas HaShavim. But the problem is, once it's at the Takanas HaShavim, she loses her beam. But she's going to claim, I don't understand. I lose my beam. They have to pay me. But they can't just pay me the $500, which is the value of the beam. What do you expect me, a daughter of aristocracy, a royal princess? I should go from Home Depot to find the beam? That's not respectable for me. I need to hire a contractor to go and source and buy this beam and deliver it to my house. That's going to cost me another $1,000. So besides the $500 you have to give me to the beam, you need to give me extra money so that I can hire somebody to help replenish that beam. Because you can't expect me to go do it. And on that, Reb Nachman answered, bilvad. She doesn't get that extra money. You know why she doesn't get that extra money? Because pe'isi. If she was indeed aristocracy, royalty, and she behaved like that with class, with an undertone, speaking respectfully, sure. Then I would say a woman like that shouldn't be expected to have to run around from Home Depot to Lowe's to buy lumber. She's entitled to extra money to hire somebody to do that for her. But since this is how she's speaking, clearly she's not royalty, and therefore she only gets the meitzim bolvad, only the meitzim. She doesn't get any extra money to have someone purchase the beam for her. Gavaltic. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Now we're changing gears. Tana we learned. Yovesh pasul. If you have a dried out lulav, it's going to be pasul. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. Rabbi Yehuda says a dried out lulav is going to be kosher. Amar Rava. Rava said machlokes belulav. The whole machlokes of whether or not dried out is pasul or kosher is only related to a lulav. The Rabbanan Savi, the Rabbanan hold makshinan lulav le'esrik. It does say pre-eitz hadar, the kapis tomorrow. So there's a hekesh, just like the pre-eitz, the esrik has to be hadar, so too the lulav has to be hadar, and something dried out is not hadar. Ma'esrik boy hadar, af lulav boy hadar. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, loy makshinan lulav le'esrik. Rabbi Yehuda says, you don't compare the lulav to the esrik. Aval be'esrik, but the esrik itself, divra akal be'inon. Everybody agrees that an esrik needs to be hadar. Now, on this Gemara, there's a fascinating machlokes Rashi and Tosfos that's yesodistic all over Shas. And let's learn this Rashi, this Tosfos. I think it's a real eye-opener. Loy makshinon. So I'm on the third wide line in Rashi. And Rashi says, Loy makshinon, loy hukshu, there is no hekish, lil moed zeh mizeh, to learn lulav from esrik. And zokt Rashi, why can't I make my own hekesh? Zokt Rashi, v'loy nita in lidrosh me'atzmai, mikol yud gimel mida shatar nidreshes ben, ela kal v'chaymer. You're not allowed to learn your own drushes from the Torah. The only drusha you're allowed to make on your own is a kal v'chaymer. All the other 13 things that we use to dash in the Torah only work if you have Kabbalah from your Rebbe. There's no do-it-yourself on any of the 13 things, only a kal v'chaymer. Now, this is contrary to what we always learn, that it's only the Gzeir Shava that need to be from Kabbalah. But everything else doesn't have to be from Kabbalah. So we need to see Tosfos. Tosfos jumps on Rashi over here. So Rashi, Rabbi Yehuda Savar lo makshina lulav le'esrik kriyish b'kundris lo hikshu lil moedzeh mizeh. There's no hekesh that we have the Kabbalah that compares the lulav to the esrik. V'lo nitin lidrosh me'atzma. You can't on your own make up your own hekesh. Mikol Yud Gimel Midai Shatar Nidreshes Ben. Ela Kal V'Chomer. The only thing you can do on your own is a Kal V'Chomer. Frek Toisus V'Tema Gedoyla Pirisha. Rashi is saying something that's very schwer. I disagree with Toisus. The Afilu Samuchin, even when you dash in two psukim that are near each other, we're allowed to darshan. Surely a hekesh where you have two things in the same pasuk. Create other copies tomorrow, they're side by side of the same pasuk. For sure you could compare the two without a Kabbalah. Even if you don't dash smuchim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when it's in two different psukim, you can welcome by akesha, but if two things in the same pasuk, moida, surely he's moida. Elos of Toshas, I disagree with Rashi, and I say kol amidus adam don ba'atzmai. Any one of the shloshes or midas that turn to just men, you could apply on your own without a Kabbalah. There's only one exception: chutz migzeira shava dein don ella imkein lomda meirabah. So Frektois is based on that. Why don't we make the hekesh? Why does Rabbi Yehuda say you don't make the hekesh and you don't need hadar by the lulav? It's right near the pre-eitz hadar. It's right near the esrog. Why don't you do it? So the Gemara v'hacha b'svara pligi. Over here, there's a svara why you shouldn't make that hekesh. The dvarim shein lakishim loisadavar. It makes sense. There's a svara, an argument to say that you should not compare the lulav to the esrog. Why? What's the svara? It's a place for shemek asavar l'shayach loshen hadar el b'peiros. The word hadar is a word that only applies to a fruit. It doesn't apply to wood, to a branch, and therefore, even though there's a hekesh from the pre-eitz hadar to the kavish tamarim, hadar is a term that doesn't even fit. It doesn't make sense. It's not applicable to a branch, and therefore you don't make the hekesh, and that's pshat in Rabbi Yehuda. So this is a yisaidistic machlokes in how you can darshan and whether or not you could do it on your own or if you have to have a kabbalah. Zok tahelig gemara vayter. Aval ba'esrik, why in esrik, divra akoil hadar bin. There, everybody agrees the esrik has to be beautiful. Frak the Gemara ubululav like boy Rabbi Yehuda hadar. You Rava are saying that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the lulav does not have to be hadar. But now we learned Rabbi Yehuda Aimer yagdenu milamaila. You should tie the lulav up on top. The leaf shouldn't spread. What could be the reason for that? What could be the justification for that? My time up. Lav mishum debay hadar. The only reason that why I could think why you would need to do that is because it makes it more beautiful. So that's not the reason. Then you don't need to have the lulav be beautiful. Hadar doesn't apply to a lulav. But Kedekatani Taima, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Mishum Tarfin, Kapois Tamorim is kafus. The word kapois means it should be bound, it should be tied. In Hayaparod, and if they're separating, Yich Fisenu, you should tie them together. So the requirement to tie them together is not al hadar. It's because the Torah says that you should tie them together. They shouldn't be spread. So the Gemara tries another kash. But not in oidin the salulav el b'minoi. Div Rabbi Yehuda. It says you're not allowed to tie the lulav only with its own min, something from its own tree, not a foreign thing. My time, what could be the problem with a mismatch? What's wrong with a mismatch? Lav mishum debay hadar. It must be because it has to be hadar. Frek says, what are you talking about? It can't be al hadar because you're not even allowed to use gold rings. Clearly, gold rings would be hadar. So the kasha of the Gemara is very difficult because why would you assume that since it's only b'mino, it's al hadar? Can't be al hadar, because then gold should be allowed. So it's a very good argument the Gemara could have made, but the Gemara made an equally good argument. So the Amar Rava afilu b'siv v'afilu b'ikra dikla. Rava said that b'mino doesn't necessarily mean a reed that's a lulav leaf, so it's identical. It could even be with a different part of the palm tree that doesn't look anything like a lulav. So clearly, it wouldn't look nice. That's a mismatch. So it's not at all because of hadar that you have to tie the lulav b'minoi. Ve'lamai time Rabbi Yehuda also the kasavar lulav tzarich. He holds that me'ikar adin the Torah requires that the lulav be bound. So that's part of the essence of the arba mina. V'maisa mina achrina, and if you use some other min to tie the lulav like gold or any other plant, havu chamisha minim. That would ultimately make it 5 minim because it's an integral part of the bundle. And you're not allowed to have 5 minim. There's only supposed to be 4 minim, and that's why you should only use something that comes from a palm tree. So now that we accepted that the lulav does not need to be hadar, now let's focus on the fact that Rabbi said that Rabbi Yehuda holds an esrog would need to be hadar. In fact, the Gemara over esrog means by Rabbi Yehuda hadar. By an esrog, does Rabbi Yehuda hold that you need to be hadar? By time we learned arba sminan shabululav, the 4 different species of the lulav that come with the lulav, kishem she'ein poichs in my hand. Just like you can't use 3, you have to use all 4. Kach ein moisivin alein. So too, you're not allowed to use more. You're not allowed to use different types. That's number 1. And number 2 is like matzah esrog. What if you couldn't find an esrog one year? Can you use a substitute? Zogt Rabbi Yehuda lo yavi like parish. You shouldn't use a parish, which I believe the article touches as quincy or something. V'lo rimon, you can't use a pomegranate. V'lo davar acher, you cannot use any other type of fruit. You can only use an esrog. Kamushin, if it's a little wilted, sharon, the esrog will still be kosher. But yevation psulim. But if it's totally dried out, it's not hadar, the esrog will be possible. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer at yevation, Rabbi Yehuda holds even yevation are kosher. So before we turn the page, I want to just take a small diversion until Yavale Parsh for the Rima and the Barach. And Tosfos is medayik. You're not allowed to use another mint, but you are allowed to use a possible esrog if you can't find a kosher esrog. So Tosfos says, can we be medayik? If you can't find a kosher esrog, you should take a possible esrog. Zok Rashi, Zok Tosfos, you don't have a raya. And the third line on the bottom of Tosfos, the Shnitchais Avol Yesh Ledaktek, the Shari Kamei Lulav Posel or Abundant B'Shas Tzchak. Tosfos wanted to bring a raya that you could even make a bracha on the posel of esrog if you don't have anything else. So Tosfos, you don't have a raya. You can't make a bracha on it, but you are allowed to use it. You are allowed to shake with the arba minim, even though you have a posel of min, if you don't have anything else, but you shouldn't make a bracha. So let's go back there. Rabbi Yehuda Mafyavation, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda wanted to prove that you can use a dried out lulav, because he said Maisa, which was actually talking about all the minim now. Because this arba minim shabalulav, so talking about all the minim. Rabbi Yehuda says yevation is good. Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa, b'bnei krachen. Once upon a time in a city where Rashi says, being that it's not near the farms, it's not near the orchards, it's very hard for them to get lulavim and esregim. There are those Rishonim will learn that in the big cities there was much more decrees against even doing mitzvahs, so they couldn't grow lulavim; they only had to have them clandestinely. So since they couldn't get a hold of these things, what they would do is show you marishan as lulaveim luvnei v'neim. They actually would save their lulavs from generation to generation because they had no access to lulavim, and they would save them. Instead of burning it with the chametz, they kept it. Amrulai, they told Rabbi Yehuda, Misham Raya, you want to bring a raya from a shasat chak that they use these? Ain't shasat chak raya. To the contrary, if anything, you have a raya from there that they weren't allowed to use such lulavim that are dried out. And since they had no choice, that's where they used it. Katanimias, let's go back to analyze Rabbi Yehuda's words. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, Afyavation Sharon. Now, Pashtus, the Bryce is speaking about all 4 minim. And Rabbi Yehuda says if it's dried out, it's kosher. So my lava esrog. It's mashma that even on the esrog, if it's dried out, it's kosher. If it's dried out, it's not hadar. So you, Rava, who say that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that esrog has to be hadar, it's clear from this brayse. Rabbi Yehuda says the esrog could be yavesh. So if it could be yavesh, it doesn't have to be hadar. So tomorrow, when Rabbi Yehuda said you can use a dried out, he didn't mean all of the 4 species. He just meant the lulav could be dried out, but the body of the esrog cannot be dried out. Amamar, kashem shein poichs in mehem. Just like you're not supposed to have less than 4 minim, you're not supposed to have more than 5 minim. Why would I think you could have more than 5 minim? Since Rabbi Yehuda said that the 3 minim have to be tied together, the hadassim, the aravis, and the lulav needs to be tied together. And if you bring another species that's not tied together, like Rashi says, if you have a 4th species there that's not tied together, we don't consider that even part of the assembly, and therefore it wouldn't be a problem. Kamash Malon, that's a problem. You shouldn't have anything else in your hand, even if it's not in the bundle. Amar Mar. Now we're going to go analyze the next halach. If you couldn't find an esrog, why in the world would you think that you could take some other fruit? That's not what the Torah says. So you might think if you can't get an esrog, take any fruit. At least we'll remember in difficult times where they didn't have access to a lulav and esrog. They should use something so that they should remember there's such a concept of lulav and esrog. Kamashal, that's a bad idea. Because then in the nafik churvimine, it can come out bad. Because after the difficult time is over and people can get proper araminim, the Asal Mishra, they're going to say, I remember in the war years, we used lemons, so I can use a lemon. Come on. And therefore, you're never allowed to use a lemon. You're never allowed to use a different fruit. You could use a pasal or esrik, but never a different fruit. Tashma. Esrik ha-yavesh pasal. Tziyonim change it to yavesh. A dried out esrik is pasal. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. So here you have a brisa that says black and white. Rabbi Yehuda allows a dried out esrik, which is clearly not hadar. So Rava wanted to say earlier that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that by an esrog you need hadar. Tiyufta the Rava tiyufta. You have a raya. Rava is wrong because clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds you're allowed to use a dried out esrog, which is not hadar. In fact, more of a loybay hadar. You want to say that Rabbi Yehuda holds the esrog does not have to be hadar? V'anan tanan. We learned in a brisa hayarik a crazy. If you have something that's green like a crazy. And if you want to know what that means, there's a long tosfos that discusses if it means green, if it means blue, if it means yellow, if it means turquoise. There's a whole bunch of different shilos of what this crazy is. And it says, Rabbi Meir Machshir, Rabbi Yehuda Paisel. Why would Rabbi Yehuda Paisel if it's green? Lav Mishum to buy hadar. It must be that he holds the esrog needs to be hadar, and the esrog that's green is not hadar. So it's Mishum to legamar peir. It's because if it's green, it means it's not fully developed, and that's not a kosher or esrog because it's not fully developed. But it's not because of a problem of hadar. So although I don't want to learn the whole tosfos, I do want to learn because we do use green esrogim, and the Gemara says here green esrogim are not good. So how do we use green esrogim nowadays? So if you look at the second to the last line of tosfos, this big tosfos over here, right under the Gemara, the third word from the end of the line, it says v'oisem esrogim habayim lefanenu yeroikim k'crazy, the green esrogim that come to us that are truly green, kisherim afilu Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda would agree that they're kosher. Kishechayzrin lamar shar esrogim. If eventually they're going to turn yellow, afilu betalosh, even though it's disconnected, if they will become green afterward, lachash hasho b'chlizman ruba. After it's sitting around for a while, it'll turn yellow. So even though it never turned yellow on the tree, you cut it off the tree when it was green, but if after it's cut, it will eventually turn yellow, you're allowed to use it now, even while it's green. So if the reason why it's green is because it's fully developed, but it's eventually going to turn yellow, which are our esrogim that are green, that's 100% kosher. Rabbi Yehuda is only saying an esrog that will never become green, that's not a fully developed esrog. I'm sorry. An esrog that will never become yellow. An esrog that's green that will never become yellow, that's not a fully developed esrog, and that you can't use.
How do you know if it will or won't?
I don't, but I guess people who know esrogim know when it's fully developed or not. A fully developed, fully grown esrog, even if it's green, it'll be good. But I myself don't have the expertise to be able to make that assessment.
I know some of the bananas that I buy that are green, somehow they never turn yellow.
That's because you eat them too quickly.
Yeah, no.
Mine turned from green to brown. They never even go through a yellow stage.
All right.
But I guess the experts are able to make that assessment. I'm not sure how that works. Okay, so let's see the Gemara right. We're about to learn how do you know that a lemon is not good for an esrog, and we're gonna get an insight into that today. So let's see the Gemara. Let's see the Gemara weiter. Oops, I'm not focusing here. Okay, let's get focused. Zog the Gemara weiter. Tashma, sheer esrog cotton. What is the minimum size of an esrog? Or meir mekego is like a nut, or b'kabetza like an egg. Why is such a small esrog not good? Lav mishum the boy hadar. Once again, it's not beautiful if it's so small. So that's not the issue. It's mishum like gomer pear. Once again, if it's very small and will never grow, that's not called completely grown. Tashma uvugotl. What's the biggest esrog you're allowed to have? It could be big, but not too big. You should still be able to hold two esrogim in one hand. The Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosy could be much bigger. It could be like a watermelon. Even if it's so big that you need two hands to hold one esrog, that will also be kosher. Again, why is, if it's too big, it's not a good esrog? My time, it's not beautiful if it's so big. It's kivan the Omar Rabba esrog b'smoil v'lulav b'yamin. The lulav is held in the right hand, and Rashi tells us because the lulav has three of the four mitzvahs. It has the lulav, the dasam, and the arabas. So you're supposed to hold it in your right hand. The esrog in your left hand. Zimin the mechalfilei. What if by mistake you have the lulav in your left hand and the esrog in your right hand, and you have to switch hands? If the esrog is so big that you can't hold anything else with it, you won't be able to swap hands. And if you try to swap it, you might swap it and then drop the esrog because you simply can't hold them. But if you can hold two esrogim in your hand, then you can hold the lulav and the esrog in one hand, and then you could take with the right hand the lulav away, and then you'll be able to switch hands. But if it's too big, you won't be able to. So it's really a practical problem. It's not a problem for other. It's really a practical problem to be able to change hands. You have to be able to change hands. Okay, so I wasn't able to prove to you with all of my questions that Rita holds.
Why can't you put it down? Yosy, why can't you put it down?
I'm not sure. Maybe, clearly, they're not davening in the Agada where there's plenty of space to put it down. Maybe they're in the Beis Hamikdash where everyone has to stand. But that we all had that kasha. Why didn't you just put it down on something? But vice versa, they wanted you to be able to do it even in midair. Frank Gemara. Okay, so you deflected all of my proofs that you need hadar. But it says in the pasuk creates hadar. So how could you argue that you don't need to have a hadar esrog? It says hadar. So tomorrow, hadar bi'ilane mishad l'shon. All that means is that it's a fruit that doesn't necessarily become fully grown in one season. Sometimes it can take multiple seasons, multiple years for an esrog to fully grow, and that's why that's what it means hadar. And Rashi says a profound thing. Rashi says this is ultimately what identifies what an esrog is. And I'm looking at Rashi, Hadar bi'ilane mishana l'shana. So Rashi may hakash ma'inan. This is the makar, the esrog amar kra, that it's an esrog. You know why? She'ain pri acher oisikin. There's no other fruit at all that takes a couple of years to grow and it stays on the tree. So this is ultimately the identifier of an esrog. Now, there's a lot of very interesting things on this. Number one is the Rishonim bring down that there actually are other fruits that stay on the tree from year to year. And they base their raya on sheyehetam pri ve'etzoi shavim. Pri etzadar shesham piryoi ve'etzoi shavim. Now, I just want to make something clear. There's no shaila in the Gemara or the Rishonim what an esrog is. We always knew what an esrog was from the Yemei Moshe, the Yemei Yeshua, depending on the Rishonim. But we always knew what esrog was. They always knew what the peri was. All of this discussion is only can we find a remez in the Torah to prove what it was. So there was never a discussion. There was never a machlokes where people used other species. They always used the right species. The question here was, can we find a makar in the Torah? So here the Gemara brings down the Dar Bilan Mishana L'Shana. But there's other Rishonim that say it's Tam Eitzev Period Shavah. So the question is, an esrog, if you taste the fruit, it tastes similar to a lemon. If you eat the wood of the esrog tree, does the wood of the esrog tree taste like a lemon? I don't think so. So I saw a fascinating thing. The Mesivta Gemara brings it down from somebody in his notes. And he says what's unique about the esrog is, what is the fruit of the esrog? I know what the fruit of a lemon is. When you take off the peel, it's those wedges. That's the fruit of the lemon. Because most of the lemon are the wedges. The peel is just a thin layer. The esrog, most of the mass of the esrog is actually skin and pulp. There's very little what we would call citrus fruit inside it. So therefore, the peri of the esrog is not the citrus part. It's actually the white pulp. On that, you could say tam peri shavin. If you taste the peel of the lemon, yes, the tree of the lemon, the wood tastes like the peel, but it definitely doesn't taste like the fruit. But by the esrog, since most of the mass is peel, there it makes sense to say tam peri shavin. And that shot tam peri shavin, and the Rishonim say that is a siman boduk menusa, that one of the simonim of an esrog is that it has very little citrus fruit inside it, and the vast majority of its mass is a thick peel. And that's the most important identifying factor of what an esrog is. So to you, it might be something that you've known for a while. I never heard this before. I thought it was pretty fascinating. And now it makes sense. I never understood Tamechu Perishobit because a piece of wood from a tree never tastes anything like the fruit, but it could taste like the peel. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. A couple more lines to learn.
Sorry. Doesn't it say eight? Doesn't it say explicitly that the tree should taste like the fruit?
Well, are you talking about by Bria Soilim when Hashem originally said?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I
'cause
think
they-
that I thought they didn't listen. I thought the earth didn't listen.
That's right. There's a famous medrash. The only one that listened was the esrog tree.
Right.
That the tree tasted, and they were all
And,
worried.
and really, all the esrog didn't change its taste. It just grew a thick skin. So the Torah said, "I want the fruit of thick skin."
Okay, it's a funny joke, but it doesn't make sense. The medrash says that that's the only one that listened, and because why it was worried, they were worried. The trees were worried that the tree itself would be consumed.
Aha. So
You
to
remember?
preserve their own.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
That's why they didn't listen. So this pshat that you just said does not
Because it doesn't make
work.
it doesn't make the tree taste better. It makes the fruit taste worse.
That's right. That's right.
I hear it. So this wouldn't still with that.
Yeah.
I hear it. Because nobody would ever want to eat an esrog nor the wood of an esrog tree.
Right.
The only people who eat esrog are people who are waiting to give birth and then they're overdue. So the Rav gives them esrog jelly. I never heard of anybody else eating esrog jelly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. V'shalashera posel. The Mishnah says v'shalashera. If you have a lulav from an asherah tree, which is an avodah zarah, v'shalir nidachas, or from near nidachas, it's posel. V'shalashera posel. For Gemara, why is the lulav of an asherah tree posel? V'amar Rava lulav shel avodah zarah lo yita. Rava said you shouldn't use an avodah zarah, Rashi, because it's mias. How could you use something for avodah zarah for a mitzvah? But from not kosher, but if you did use it, it would still be kosher. You would be yotzei the mitzvah. And Rashi gives examples of how it would be a lulav shel avodah zarah. Either if you used it as a broom to sweep in the base of avodah zarah, or if it was for some reason that was they used the leaves of a lulav tree in avodah zarah. Like they have something called Palm Sunday, right? So they use it in part of their ceremonies. They use it. That's shel avodah zarah. But it's still kosher, and Rashi tells us because mitzvahs lav lehenis nitnu. When we're doing a mitzvah, we're not. It's asher b'nah, but you're not having a no from it. When you're doing a mitzvah, you're serving your banish lav. So there's no problem with using yisurei hana for a mitzvah of lulav. So tomorrow I'll tell you why it's no good. Normally, if the agoya is an asher, you don't have to go cut it down. You're not allowed to have a no from it, but you don't have to go destroy a tree. But the asher of Moshe, and Rashi says that's referring to when Klal Yisrael moved in to Eretz Yisrael. We learned it in, I believe, in this week's parsha or last week's parsha. It says Vashereim Tisrifun Be'ich. I think that was last week's parsha. No, I'm sorry, it was this week's parsha. It was Re'eh. It was in Re'eh. At the beginning of Re'eh, it's in the first aliyah. It says Vashereim Tisrifun Be'ich, which means you have to destroy the Asherah. So the only time where there was a tzivoy to destroy the Asherah was when they moved into Eretz Yisrael. And since it's set for destruction, the chituse mikdash shiure. Since this lulav has to be burnt, we know you have to have 4 tefachim to be a lulav, but we don't consider it that it has 4 tefachim because it's set to be burnt. It's very similar to every Sunday morning when I make up my mind, I'm going on a diet, I'm going to burn my calories. Instantly, my fat melts off me, and now I fit into a small pair of pants because once it's destined to be destroyed, it's considered as if it's destroyed already. Dekanami, I'll prove it to you that works. When the Mishnah introduced the psul of the Asherah, it's side by side with your Nidachas. And just like by your Nidachas, we know the reason why you can't use it is it's Ketuse Michlas Yurei, because we consider it burnt, because it's supposed to be burned. The reason for the Asherah is the same thing. And therefore, we're not speaking about any Asherah. We're speaking about the Asherah that there was a mandate for it to be destroyed, and that was the Asherah of Moshe, the Asherahs that were growing in Eretz Yisrael when Klal Yisrael came in. And I guess we could stop over here. And Rebbeinu should hope that we should be zoicha soon to be able to be Mekayim these beautiful mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Good Chodesh.
Good Chodesh.
Fair.